Welcome to Magic by Design. No time to fall asleep on the job this week because we are reviewing Disney's 16th animated feature, Sleeping Beauty. If you're new to the show, here's the deal. We are aiming to watch and review every Disney animated feature film. Each week, we break down a movie from the Disney canon in an attempt to discover the secrets behind the magic. But before we do battle with a dragon named Maleficent, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ken, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host / brother Garrett. Gar, how are you?
Blue!
Pink!
Blue!
Pink!
I'm going to do this for the whole episode. Just go back and forth. Blue and pink for the whole episode. I'm doing fine. Sleeping Beauty. It's a film.
It's a film that we watched.
And I read the story. I didn't read the story. I listened to the story. Again, the audiobook. But still.
How long is it?
7 minutes. So really, is that a lot of work?
Yeah, it's not a huge amount of work, but we'll give you an A+ for actually completing the task this week.
Yeah. Did you? I didn't know it wasn't a Brothers Grimm story. It was collected in the Brothers Grimm books, based off oral history, but it's a Charles Perrault, whatever it is. You speak French.
Perrault?
There you go. You just said it in a vaguely more recent accent. That's fine. That's an authentic accent, Garrett. Well learned. You've been to France.
Yeah, but fans may remember him from Cinderella.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting, these are fairy tales. So these, precede the authors that, they precede Charles, they precede Brothers Grimm, and of course, they precede Disney. These go back way, way back. And it's kind of interesting that, originally these were passed through oral history, through oral distribution. And then they were more codified in written form. And then Brothers Grimm collected Charles, the Brothers Grimm apparently collected an oral version of Charles Perrault's story into the Grimm's fairy tales. And then Disney adapted. And it's interesting that an adaptation by Disney is the way these stories are spread in our modern culture. We don't really read books anymore. We should, but we don't. So the way this culture sustains, and the way in another 300 years people will be still telling the stories of Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, are because the likes of Disney, immortalize them in our canon via films and TV shows and all that fun stuff. And it's interesting to think of that is the means of distributing the stories that we used to just tell to each other via words. Now we did it by books, and now we do it by movies. And how will we do it in the future is the question, Ken. Will there be a different way of doing it?
That's a good point. So with the oral tellings, there was a definitive version, and then with the written tellings, there was a definitive version. And now the most prescient medium that we have today still is movies, most likely. It's shifting towards the internet. So the Disney version, to a lot of people, is the only version. And to your point, where are we going in the future? Possibly some kind of digital version, or, some kind of postmodern telling?
Some version that's injected straight into your brain at birth, and then you know it immediately via the microchip in our cyborg brains.
Makes sense.
That's how it'll be spread in the future. But it's even interesting how it's oral tellings of stories inherently cause differences, because the whole idea of Chinese whispers. So every time the story is retold, it's retold slightly differently by different people. The written version, that doesn't really happen with, because once it's written, it's a firm text. But then you get the Disney version, which is very different. On multiple, it has all the beats of the major story, but the way it's told is actually very different from the original story. So it's interesting how that story has evolved again.
You can tell us all about it in the story section.
Yeah.
Sleeping Beauty was made while Walt Disney was building Disneyland. It was 8 years in the making. Sleeping Beauty was in development for most of the 50s, so hence the prolonged production time, but also the painstaking detail that was lended to every choice in the production of the film also contributed to a long production time.
But you can see it. You watch this film. I was making the point to you while they were dancing in the woods, that there's a moment where they're dancing in front of a lake, and you see the reflection dancing in time with them actually dancing. And that shot, to the narrative, to the story, adds absolutely nothing. That shot is purely flexing. That shot is purely, we can do this, so we're going to do it. It's going to cost time. It's going to cost money. It's going to be difficult, but it'll look pretty, so it's worth it. And it's one of those things, it's oh, that's just for the art. There's no other reason other than it's just for the art. Just to show off, to be look how good animators we are. And it'll look nicer than if it wasn't there. And that's the kind of thing that, a company that made this film only looking at the bottom line would have just scrapped that. It's they just dance in the woods. They don't need to dance in front of water. that just makes the shot like infinitely more complex for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah, so Disney really swung for the fences with this one, and they really wanted it to be different from the previous ones. Disney, we'll get into it, but they wanted it to be something that stood the test of time, and to your point, it was a piece of art more than it was just an animation, and it was decidedly more serious in tone as well. Comedy here and there, they injected the moments of humor, but it was more of a serious piece in my view.
This week, you were watching an episode of Thundercats Go, and I commented on how horrifically cheap the animation looked.
Well, it's a weekly television show, Gar. Come on.
It's still very cheap. They just use blank backgrounds a ton, and it's like, all right. But this film is the exact opposite. This film, every shot is just rich and lush with detail. Every shot is different. Every shot is varied. Every shot has a ton going on with it. This film is maybe not their Bambi is still a very pretty film.
Yes.
And might still be the prettiest film, but this is far and away their most detailed piece of animation. Like you commented, I think with Snow White, you could pause on every shot, and that's probably not really true with Snow White.
Yeah,
it's probably true with Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, there's that old cliche for a lot of these old Disney films, but this is specifically true. And we'll dive into the animation in a minute, but it was specifically inspired by artistic movements, and you can see that because it was like moving paintings, really.
Yeah, this film is immensely pretty. It's immensely detailed, which again goes back to the idea that they will not let this go by without there being 700 things going on in each frame. You might hear some birds in the background, but this is
they're Disney birds.
They're Disney birds. This is again production values, Ken. It's production values.
Interesting note here, Gar. Sleeping Beauty was the first film to be photographed in the Super Technorama 70 widescreen process. So
how is that different from the one they did for Lady and the Tramp?
I know. Lady and the Tramp, our previous film, was the first widescreen film. This one, it's wider again, so it allows you to kind of pan sideways, side scroll more, so it just creates more space. But the animators found that very difficult because they had to work on massive sheets of paper to make that work. So they found it very tricky.
They're drawing this, so yeah, it's easy to do like a 4x3 painting because it's slightly bigger than a square, but it's still just like boop 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 boop. There you go. This is the size of like an easel or whatever. You can just slap it on there and draw it. Whereas this is whatever the dimensions that widescreen are with the bars on the top. So I don't know. It's not 16:9.
It's probably a 3 or 4 foot piece of paper that you're having to move, animate characters on.
Yeah. So instead of like standing in front of it, you have to move along it, which I'd imagine is quite difficult. And makes the task more difficult.
Yeah, so very much a labour of love was Sleeping Beauty,
and like that's probably a good contributor to why it took so long, because like that's the way it works with technological shifts. As you work with the new technology and the new technology, because no one understands the new technology, no one's made a film on the new technology. Well, they made Lady and the Tramp, but as you said, it's a little different. They've done something new, and that takes time. It takes time to master. It takes time to do well, not just do. So you see that a lot with video games. As we move into new console generations, games take longer because people have to work out new technology, and new technology takes longer to do. Like doing art in 4K takes longer than it did just with blocky polygons in 1998. So I'd imagine it was quite similar back then. Doing art in widescreen took a lot longer than it would even just filling screen space, because the screen is wider now, than it would have, say, for Snow White in 4x3.
And by all accounts, I watched a documentary as part of my research. Every new technology and every technique and every expense was put into this movie to make it the piece of art that they envisioned in the production. Although, Gar, this was the last Disney adaptation of a fairy tale for some years because of its initial mixed critical reception and underperformance.
Critics in the 50s. Let's talk about this.
We'll go into. I'll detail what their problems were, and we'll go into it. It also underperformed at the box office. The studio did not return to the genre until 30 years later, after Walt Disney died in 1966, with the release of The Little Mermaid in 1989. Reviews of the film criticized the similarity to Snow White.
It's better than Snow White.
Crude animation. I'm not really sure.
Oh, that one is just like, what the hell are you talking about?
I think what they mean is that the design of the characters is quite angular and quite...
So?
It's to match the backgrounds, basically. But also, I think a lot of the backgrounds are static. They're almost like paintings. I think people are just saying, well, why isn't there more going on in the shots where the characters are the focus in most of the things?
That's always been the case with these films. It's not like... And there is tons going on in these shots. I like critics in the 50s. What's going on? Because they didn't like Bambi either. And it's like, what is wrong with you people? You rave about Dumbo, which is perfectly fine, but it's,
It's a B-movie.
Yeah, there's no depth to the Dumbo. It's a perfectly fine little enjoyable film. As opposed to stuff like Sleeping Beauty, which is lushly animated and like much better plotted than the Snow White on literally every level. Snow White's third act is literally like 25 seconds long. It's like, oh, she's revealed herself, Boulder dead. That's the entire third act of Snow White. As opposed to this, which has a big caper and adventure. It's a full Lord of the Rings style adventure.
And a big showdown with Maleficent at the end.
A big you shall not pass on top of a rock with a Balrog, basically.
Other criticism came from the plot being more like a monster film than a fairy tale.
So what? Oh, this film isn't one-dimensional. God, it's horrible.
Most at the time viewed Snow White as the better film. Praise came for the singing voice of Mary Costa, who played Aurora, and the three good fairy characters. So it's important to note here, guys, it was the second most successful film at the box office in 1959 after Ben-Hur, but it did not make the revenue required to make its money back due to the enormous cost for the
They
time.
spent 7 years making it, so like, it needed to be a monster hit to make that money back.
It's like probably the best part of a decade in development, but the massive cost, because you saw the attention to detail in every facet, the characters, the backgrounds, the music, the effects, the score. Huge expense we're talking even for the time.
Yeah.
Moving in here to the animation, this was a big gamble from an artistic point of view because, as we said, it's very artistic and opulent. We have here a more sophisticated and decorative approach, a focus on design. So if you're looking at this picture, it's almost a piece of design rather than a film in a way. It's because it's a very, very specific aesthetic.
Yeah, it's very like the variety in the environments, and like I particularly enjoyed Maleficent's castle because like that's such a hard pivot from the rest of the film. Like
you commented at the time you thought it looked 3D.
Yeah, it almost looks 3D the way it's animated, and it's not even pretty. It's distinct. It's jagged. It's threatening and imposing. It's everything like an evil villain's castle. What's the name of her mountain? Forbidden Mountain?
Forbidden Mountain.
Yeah, if you think of what should the Forbidden Mountain look like, that's pretty good.
And as you said, like Lord of the Rings was made 30 years later and it had a very similar aesthetic.
Yeah, I got full Lord of the Rings vibes from like all the orc fortresses and stuff like that in Lord of the Rings, and their dragon is basically a Balrog.
Disney wanted to go beyond the normal painting, the usual painting that they did. They wanted something that was really illustrative and detailed.
Nobody noticed at the time, apparently.
Every frame, as we said, is a beautifully composed image. Something you could literally hang on the wall as a painting, especially shots of the forest as they're moving through it. And I would literally buy that and hang it on my wall as a painting.
Ken's entire house, when he eventually buys a house, which he is currently trying to buy a house.
I am indeed.
So when he buys a house, he's just going to fill the walls with screenshots of Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah. The film was filled with pre-Renaissance, medieval and Gothic influences, which were what inspired Eyvind Earle. It's not Ivan, it's Eyvind. Eyvind. You don't see that name around anymore.
There you go.
He was the background artist tasked with creating the look of Sleeping Beauty. The reason they chose him, because he had a very specific and strict vision, and Disney wanted someone who would really kind of fulfill the brief. Mary Blair, as we know, who would have been the go-to person at the time, had left the studio. And Walt felt like, you've probably seen her concept drawings in the past, especially if you're researching these films, and they're highly illustrative and decorative. And Walt felt like they never got that in the final animation. So that's what they really wanted in this film.
So she's left and it's like, let's actually do what she wanted to do the moment after she leaves. I'm sure she felt good about that. Yeah.
There's a strong vertical feeling and elongated lines in the background, and that was applied to the character design as well. The synthesis between the character and the background was a new approach at the time. Previous to this, you had the kind of painted backgrounds and the characters were superimposed. And, in fairness, I don't really notice it too much. There are times where it does feel like they're two separate things. Bambi is a very good example of one that kind of blended very nicely, which is why it's held in such high esteem, in my opinion.
Like, you feel like, even I commented on the audio at the start of this film, where they have Maleficent inside of a great hall. And there's an echo there. And I was like, is that new for these films? Which I think it is. That they have like ambient audio. The audio actually matches the environment it's meant to be in. Usually it's just like, it's as if people have a lapel microphone at all times.
Yeah, well, Foley artists and sound artists did exist. But, Hollywood was still in its not early years, but I suppose the art of filmmaking was still evolving and being established. So
and like
it became more sophisticated.
In live action films, that happens naturally, because you're filming in a great hall, so there'll be an echo. You know what I mean? So that doesn't happen in animation. You actually have to make that happen in animation, unless you record the VO in a great hall, which is highly unlikely. So you have to master it and mix it so that it sounds like they're in this great castle with an echo, as opposed to in a recording studio, which is where they actually are. So I'd imagine in the early days, both the expense and just like we don't need to do that. We just want people to hear it.
People won't question it.
Yeah, and in fairness, I didn't until I heard it in this film, and I was like, wait, they haven't done that, have they?
This is better. Animators, going back to the character design, had a big challenge in designing the characters so that they stood out against these ornate backgrounds.
Bright colours, dresses.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy, really.
Earlier versions, they found it hard to have the characters read against the backgrounds. They either blended in too much, or the opposite, they stood out too much. So
just don't have the more greens and browns, and you should be all right.
So they had to be stylized in a way that matched. So that's why you see the different kind of the elongated lines, the almost sharpness of them. The precision of the lines is almost like an architect's drawing in a way. It's similar. You still saw the Disney, the patented Disney style, but it's just a bit more polished and refined. The fairies did break from this style, though, of the other characters. They were more rounded and styled in the classic Disney fashion. They're more broad in their movement and sequences as well, versus the more grounded and realistic treatment of the other characters.
Well, they're magic.
Yeah, so I think they not only did they make the right choice for those characters, but I also thought the film needed it as well, because all films need that element of levity and comedy.
Well, yeah, there's plenty of jokes in this film. As I said, the fairies are mostly the comic relief, but there's some other jokes.
So Mark Davis designed Aurora and Maleficent. He had the brief to create those two characters, two polar opposites, so that was an achievement for him at the time, to create a character that's pure good and pure evil. And, Maleficent has... Sleeping Beauty, sometimes I forget what she looks like, but Maleficent has become an iconic character in pop culture.
Yeah, let's be real. Like, this film is the Maleficent film, and it's a reason why when they made a live-action remake, they didn't make Sleeping Beauty. They made Maleficent. So, Maleficent is the first good Disney villain.
Yeah, her motives are slightly cloudy, but that's linked with the story itself.
Yeah.
But, her first appearance, from the moment she first appeared, the visual effect is actually stunning. But, she's imposing, she's threatening, you get the sense of menace from her, and you get the sense that she's not a cartoonish villain. She means business. She's just a bad person who wants to cause harm.
And I think most importantly, she's powerful.
Yeah.
She's not the wicked queen from Snow White.
Who did a bit of sorcery on the
who's
side.
like, I'm doing some potions to configure my face, and I'm going to turn myself into a wench, and this is my plan. Maleficent is like, you're running away from my castle. I'm going to strike you down with thunder. You're getting into that castle. I'm going to turn into a dragon and burn you to death. That is power. That is a villain. That is badass.
You're forgetting the Forest of Thorns she put in front of the castle before that as well to try and stop them.
Yeah, and she's not in the book. Maleficent is not in the book. Well, she is, but she's not a named character. Because in the story, it's the same setup that they have 12 wise... Oh, I can't remember what they called them. They might have been fairies. I don't think it was fairies. But 12 wise people who came who existed in the land, but they could only invite 11. And then the 12th one is like, well, fuck you. I will take this badly and curse your child for this indecency. And I actually, you know what?
And I'll wait 16 years for this to pay off.
Yes. And after that, the 12th fairy or whatever disappears. They don't actually appear in the book after that again, or the story after that again. It just plays out. But honestly, it is a very thin, reason for her to be super mad and super vengeful. She wasn't invited to a christening, basically.
I get that, but once we're in,
I admire the pettiness.
Yeah.
You slighted me, and I'm going to spend 16 years of my life getting back at you. Never mind the fact that she probably turned down invitations to 5 other christenings during this, just while she was busy plotting her revenge. Never mind the fact that she wasted 16 years of this, because her idiot minions were still looking for babies when the thing was 16.
That was a funny gag where she realised, and then she started laughing, and then she freaked out and started zapping them all, and then she said they were disgraced to the forces of evil.
And also, never mind the fact that she starts relatively tamely with, oh, you'll prick your finger on a spinning thing. What are those called?
A spinning wheel.
Spinning wheels, there we go. I was close. On a spinning wheel and you will die. And that, again, eventually gets softened into fall asleep forever. But then she's like, why doesn't she start with a dragon? Why doesn't she you have not invited me. I'm going to turn into a dragon and burn this place down.
Well, as I said last night, maybe the dragon is like the Hail Mary pass.
Well, I would use the dragon anytime anybody slights me. I'm just like, all right, dragon time to burn you. Though I suppose we don't know whether or not she can turn back into Maleficent after she turns into the dragon. That's never established canon.
She dies.
Maybe she dies there, but maybe she's a dragon forever when she transforms into a dragon. So maybe that's why it is the Hail Mary play. We don't know the deep Maleficent lore. Of course, Ken, Maleficent is the main villain in Kingdom Hearts 1.
Yes, so. I saw in my Wikipedia research, and I thought you could have mentioned it, so I'm going to let you take the floor there, Gar.
Yeah, so it's interesting that, like, not only is Maleficent clearly one of Disney's best villains, she's up there probably with, like, Jafar and Scar as some of the, like, really and Hades as some of the really memorable villains, but she became the villain of the entire Kingdom Hearts franchise, and she's the villain of the first game, and then you beat her, and then she's kind of like, she's still a villain in the later games, but she's one of those villains that you never really fight, but more like have a love-hate relationship with, and then occasionally helps you, that kind of villain. Yeah. The Team Rocket kind of villain.
Yeah, she's like the big bad in the first one, but then you beat her, and then she sort of becomes an ally, but also can turn on you at any point.
Yes, and she's also scheming for her own end throughout the entire series, and she's still doing things. But yeah, that's how iconic Maleficent became. That when Japanese game developers at Square Enix were making a Disney game, they're like, all right, which of these villains is going to be our main villain? And it's like, duh, it's going to be Maleficent. Because she's badass.
She's probably a top 5.
She's the best villain in Disney history.
You could make an argument that she's number 1. But like the realistic movements were inspired by detailed live action, and the woman who played Maleficent really went for it in her gestures and her actions, and just the way that she holds herself in that kind of perfect posture. But then when she's pissed off, she just like opens up and she's menacing. She's casting spells. It's really, really dynamic action, and the wider format meant that they were able to follow the scene as it moves through different angles and points of view. We didn't see that before. You see characters coming towards you, which would have been very difficult to do previous to this, and just
because you have less screen real estate.
Yeah. So, like, we're seeing different angles, different points of view. Last point on the animation before we really jump into the story. I know we touched on it there, Gar. There really were, and I know that the special effects were really developing over the last few films, and we saw some really great stuff in the likes of Cinderella especially, but this was state of the art for special effects. Some of them look almost like computer graphics, really fluid and polished, but the sequence when you mentioned there Maleficent turns into the dragon is probably one of the most iconic things from the film, and it stands up today as a piece of animation that you could put against a modern film.
Yeah, the critics at the time are completely out to lunch. This film is gorgeous and detailed and immensely pretty, and if you watch this film and you're like, the animation is not very detailed, I question your critical eye, honestly. If you're sitting there and you're like, that's your takeaway from Sleeping Beauty, really?
If any criticism could be leveled against it, it's too detailed. Like, I find myself getting lost in the background sometimes.
You almost want to go frame by frame. You know, alright, pause, and ooh, detail.
And like, oh, characters are doing something, sorry. I have to keep looking.
Bibbidi bobbidi boo.
In terms of the story, it is, as we said, based on the telling of Sleeping Beauty by Charles Perrault.
So is he basically like the Brothers Grimm before there was Brothers Grimm?
I think so.
So he'd like collect these stories,
or maybe they were doing it.
Well, they based some of his work on some of their work on his. So clearly, he was probably an inspiration for them.
As you noted, Garrett, the original story is only 4 to 5 paragraphs long.
It's very short. It's a 7-minute audiobook if you want to listen to it.
Yeah, so Disney had to add a lot to the story, and Maleficent was one of the main things that they added, as you said.
Yeah.
There's less gags and side characters in this, and also less side plots. So it's more of a direct telling of the story. We have the character of the minstrel, who's included to lighten up the picture, as well as the fairies. And there's
completely irrelevant to the film.
There's some antics. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He doesn't have any bearing on the story, but he is one of the notable side plots, but that only lasts a few minutes. Interestingly, the script wasn't reworked or developed like other features. The final film was pretty much what emerged in the early 1950s, which says to me that they didn't really divert from the plot of the actual story too much other than to enhance the role of Maleficent.
Like the original story is like baby born, event for baby, person not invited, person curse, not Aurora, she's called Rosalind in the story. There you go, Ken, they changed the name. And Briar Rose, which is interestingly the name of a pub near us, pub/restaurant.
It is indeed.
So that's where they got their name, I would assume. But yeah, the original story, she pricks her finger, she falls asleep. Everyone in the town falls asleep when she pricks her finger, actually. So it's actually like the animated film, except there's no fairies putting people to sleep. There are actually no real fairies fairies at all after the opening.
Fairies actually put the entire kingdom to sleep to cover up their mess.
To cover up their failure. Whereas in this, when Sleeping Beauty falls asleep, everyone else falls asleep too, and also the castle is surrounded by thorns, which that's where that comes from as well. But it's retconned in the animated film. Then a prince finds out. A prince walks up the tower, kisses her, happy ever after. That's the story. Like it's really that simple. There's no real like swings and roundabouts. It's not a roller coaster at all. It's like this thing happens, this thing is resolved. So in order to flesh that out, as you said, they added Maleficent as the as the big bad, the driving force behind most of what happens in the film. They beefed up the role of the fairies as well because they disappear after the opening act, and they also beef up the role of the prince because the prince just shows up and kisses her, and there you go, job done.
Yeah, same as Snow White. The challenge here was to do something different from the other two princess films that came before.
Because this is like, it has the beats of Snow White. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same story, but like you can't complain too much. People were criticizing that, but the origin stories are similar because their fairy tales follow similar narrative structures.
Yes, they follow the similar, princess happy, princess follows the true love first kiss, princess awake happy ever after. That's the format we're working off here.
And we talked about this when they produced Snow White. They purposely limited the role of the prince because, as we said in our first episode, they had envisioned doing all these fancy, elaborate sequences with the prince having a bigger role, but they just didn't have the skills or the technology at the time. Whereas here, the prince has an active role in rescuing the princess rather than showing up at the end, and even probably has some of the more iconic scenes where he's escaping the dungeon and fighting Maleficent as a dragon.
Yes, where the fairies are like, you must escape by yourself. Here's a sword, here's a shield, but also we're gonna bippity boppity boo everything in your way. Everything's fine.
Yeah,
the fairies are the heroes of this film. Let's be real.
They create a bit of a shield for him.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, this bridge is falling, bippity boo. Oh, the bird is flying, boppity pip.
But in fairness, that is in league with their characters because
they would. But
they try to not interfere, and their intent is not to interfere and to let people do their own thing. But then they just can't help it because they're kind of fussing mothers, for want of a better term.
Yeah, they're the heroes of this film. Get out of here, Prince. You're not a fairy.
Yeah, and
they also make astonishing cakes,
yes,
or eggs commit suicide. It's like magic eggs, and the eggs are obviously sentient because the eggs are responding to requests. So the eggs are alive, and then the eggs are like, now I shall break myself in half, and the egg is dead.
Yeah.
Suicidal eggs.
The fairies are actually my favourite element of this film. I enjoyed the adventure and the action. I enjoyed the animation and the backgrounds, but the fairies, they had, you could tell that they were, related or they knew each other in some way, but they all had distinct characters. If I were to envision this film, the three fairies, probably because they're coloured in these very distinct primary colours, but also because they just have this kind of personality that's warm and kind of inviting and it's memorable. I especially love Merryweather because she's just a bit of a grump. She's
just kind of like she's kind of spoiled.
She's younger than the other two. She's a bit naive and she wants to kind of she's impatient and she has some really funny one-liners as well.
And I think her VO is the best. The inflection in her accent is really, really funny.
Yeah, and that's a really good performance from that actress because that's not how she talks usually. She actually, I'm pretty sure it's the same person that did the voice of Lady in Lady the Tramp, so it's a really different performance here. But I just really enjoyed them. And as you said, if you really think about it, they have the biggest influence on the events of the film, but they're also probably the heroes in the end as well.
Yeah, and they're the funniest part of the film. And there's just everything the fairies do just has just a whip of farce to it, and it's really enjoyable. I
love how as well they resolve to give up magic for 16 years and Merryweather is just not up for it.
Yeah.
And then they try to make a dress and a cake for Aurora for her 16th birthday, and then they realize that they can't do it because they've never done anything their entire lives, and they just get the magic wands back, which results in them being discovered, which kind of propels the story. But another thing I wanted to know as well, the animation for, they're obviously fairies, so their natural form is smaller, and when they kind of transition into the smaller fairies, they kind of do a kind of a swirly thing, which I thought was really nice for hand-drawn animation.
I think that the plotting of this film is certainly more sophisticated than Snow White on every level. The story of the film, it actually has a 3-act structure, as opposed to Snow White, which has, I don't even know what Snow White has. It might not even be 2 acts, really.
I think it's kind of a prolonged first act and then a quick climax.
Yeah, so it's like Snow White structurally as a story is just mess.
It's quite flat.
As opposed to this, which has a very clear, concise, it's a 3-act structure. And they've been nailing actually this was 77, it wasn't 75. But they've really been nailing the 75 minutes lately. It's like, that's right in the button. 75 minutes, hour and a quarter, in and out.
Yeah. Unlike features like Fantasia, I didn't feel the length of any of the recent films.
Fantasia was 90, that's the reason.
Yeah. As you said, they got in and got out. And, when you are watching the clock, that's a bad sign for a film. But these last few films, especially Sleeping Beauty, I was so transfixed with it. And by the time we were getting to the kind of the third act and we're getting to the conclusion, I was like, oh, it's nearly over. It's like the 85 minutes breezes by. 75, excuse me. There.
Maths, can't add.
I did ordinary level maths for my leaving exams. So I still got into college, so it's all good.
Yeah, this film is efficient. There's very little wasted motion. Most of what happens in this film is valuable to what is happening in the film. It's not like, oh, we're going to go off and do some we're not going to do the pink elephant scene. We're not going to film 6 minutes of this film with abstract animation for no reason whatsoever. And
anything that is a diversion or a side plot or something that's just there for kind of effect is very short.
Yeah. So, like when the fairies are offering their gifts, there's a little animated sequence, but it's like 20 seconds long. They tick a lot of the boxes. There's like storybook motif at the very start, weird blue birds, abstract animation sequence. So it's like, ooh, we're ticking all the Disney. I fell in love at one glance. Actually, no, I fell in love to one note of a song I heard in the distance.
What if he found her and then she was an Ugo? Would he still love her?
What if he was an Ugo, Ken?
Nobody's an Ugo in fairy tales.
That's true. And she's just super amazing and she has a wonderful singing voice and everybody loves her. Typical. These people are supposed to live hard lives and then get the satisfying fairy book ending, storybook ending at the end. Whereas no, they just live a wonderful life where she sings in the woods and she's distraught at the idea that she's a princess, which actually, that's a subversion far earlier than they usually have subversions, where it's like, you're a princess! And then she bawls her eyes out because she just fell in love.
And she wants to be a normal person so she can choose who she wants to marry.
Yeah, which the idea of arranged weddings, going back to those days where it's just like, and now you shall marry this person so we can merge our kingdoms. And it's like, you have no say in this.
It's even a bit weirder because in this film, Philip is quite a bit older than Aurora. So he's about maybe 4, 5, 6 when he meets her after she's born and they're engaged.
Yeah.
He's engaged to a baby at that point.
Yeah.
Very strange.
This is your baby wife. Come back in 16 years. It's like, oh, yay.
When she's fully cooked. That's very strange stuff. But, the times were what they were, and that still exists in some places. And
yes.
We won't comment on that too much further. That's a bit of a rabbit hole.
But yeah, I'm gonna arrange a wedding for you, Ken.
Thanks, Gar. I already have a partner.
Wow.
This is awkward, isn't it?
You're now in the Sleeping Beauty position. I want to live my life.
I don't want to be a princess. Moving on quickly here to the music, Gar. There is quite a lot to talk about in this, actually.
Good score.
In April 1952, Jack Lawrence and Sammy Fain, who had done previous films, were signed to compose the score. Originally, the score for Sleeping Beauty was more of a traditional Disney score, complete with bright, uplifting musical theatre pop songs, but it just didn't fit the world that they had created.
Yeah, that's not the film. So, you do have to make music that fits the film.
So they decided to shift to a classical score inspired by the score for the ballet Sleeping Beauty, written by Tchaikovsky. At this point, it's hard to separate the two, almost as if they were made to live together. Because there was times when I noticed the classical score. You're like, oh, you can tell that they're taking elements from the classical score, even when for example, the fairies are sneaking up on the castle and stuff like that. But it blends so seamlessly that it just looks like it was a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I mentioned the two scores, the motif score and the slapstick score. This is much more of a motif score than a slapstick score. So when Maleficent shows up, she has her motifs. When they visit Maleficent's castle, they have their motifs. Whereas
when you had the romantic elements, it's hung on Once Upon a Dream.
Yeah, which the actual songs in this film, I think they're all fine, but there's not an iconic Sleeping Beauty song, really.
I would push back on that slightly. I would say Once Upon a Dream is an iconic song because it forms a strong part of the Disney identity today. And
where have you heard that song recently?
It's ubiquitous at Disneyland, Gar.
Well, I haven't heard it there, so who's right here?
Only one song remained from the original concept score, which was Once Upon a Dream, actually. So it was an attempt to kind of bridge the gap because it's one of those more appealing poppy kind of musical theatre songs. But it didn't break with the aesthetic too much. It blended quite well with the score that they chose.
And the moment they put it in the film as well. Like, it's the happy moment where she's dancing in the woods.
Interestingly as well, the artists listened to the Tchaikovsky ballet to get a feeling for what they were trying to achieve with their characters, especially when it came to the movement and dancing.
And yeah, they have experience animating to Tchaikovsky.
They do. So, like, the dancing is especially effective for that because the movements are timed with the...
Yeah, what was that in? That was in Make Mine Music, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you see elements of it in...
Like that animation style, that idea has been translated much better into an overall film, which is the way this should work.
Yeah, so like...
Instead of making me watch concept pieces as a film.
So when you're watching the dancing, especially at the end, it's like... Yeah. But they were actually animating to that, so you could see the movement is timed perfectly with the music. So really effective. Also a milestone here because the score was recorded in stereo in a state-of-the-art studio in Germany.
Why in Germany?
Because they probably had the best technology at the time. I guess.
They do. The Germans are very good like that. Well, actually, no. This is pretty like recent post-war.
Yeah.
Like it's about what? When was this released? Late 50s.
59.
59. So about 13 years after the war. So it's like Germany's still not in a great state 13 years after the war, but they're like, we're building our audio studios. We'll give you that much. And it's like, we couldn't have done... Maybe it's as simple as like, maybe the studio was always there. And they're like, well, it's the middle of the war. We can't ask the Germans for it right now. We're currently fighting them. And then it's like, the war is over. We can use their wonderful audio studio.
Not to mention we've got them on their knees with all these reparations, so we'll get it cheap. In terms of final thoughts and legacy, this film... I'm not sure if I would put it on the level of masterpiece with Bambi. The film is remembered for its perfection and attention to detail.
What do you remember the film for? Not who cares what the other people remember the film for, Ken?
For me, like, I just think the achievement for the time was something that hadn't been done to that point and hasn't been done since. And I know, with developments in technology and techniques, there are films that have achieved... equally vibrant worlds and characters, but we have to remember that this at the time was all done by hand in a very painstaking and prolonged process. So there are films that have achieved the same artistic value and look, but we have to take into account that this was done literally from scratch. There's no shortcuts here. It all had to be done
on new technology as well.
Yeah,
which is fancy. What are we on? 16?
16, yes.
This is the second best Disney film.
You think so?
Yeah, easily. It's behind Bambi still for me, but it's better than the rest. Like, putting this next to Snow White, it's so much better than Snow White. It's more detailed. It's more... The songs are better. The music is better. The plot is better. The characters are better. Like, the freaking Seven Dwarves are absolutely pointless in that film. Who cares? As opposed to, like when you compare the depth of the fairies to the depth of the Seven Dwarves, it's a no contest. One is, like, fully fleshed out characters with interesting bits and interesting character quirks and contribute to the narrative. And the other is like, I'm doing dopey gags, It's like, there's...
Or I'm sleeping. So I fall asleep.
And the final, when you compare Maleficent to the Evil Queen, no contest. Snow White's character design is probably a little more iconic. That's the only place I think Snow White really wins. But
the thing that really strikes me about this movie as well, I'm not going to say you could say it was made yesterday, but the lines, the colours, the backgrounds, they're all so vibrant and perfect that you would believe that it was made more recently, and it does stand the test of time.
Like, this film is 61 years old. When you look at this film and think, this is 61 years old, and I'm not sure the Disney Plus version we watch, I don't know, has it been touched up? I don't know that. But looking at it, that's not a film that looks 61 years old.
Yeah, there's no shortcuts, there's no dodgy sequences, no dodgy backgrounds, no half-realised characters. Everything is done in meticulous, painting-like detail.
And like, the story is cohesive, it's well constructed, there's silly elements of it, but it's a fairy tale, a children's film. It's not going to be everything is super serious.
And the payoff is more satisfying because, kind of like Cinderella as well, which had a much better 3-act structure, it felt earned because it wasn't kind of, a race to the finish like it was with Snow White. There was twists and turns, there was a big battle sequence. The prince had to fight his way to Sleeping Beauty or Aurora to awaken her. So it just felt like a more satisfying conclusion because it wasn't just, as you said, rock falls on Evil Queen and then she's dead and then they wake her up. That's it.
And then the film is over. The only thing I'll say is I think Aurora is kind of the forgotten Disney princess.
Yeah. Like, as I said earlier, sometimes I forget what she looks like because she's kind of like budget Cinderella. Yeah, Cinderella is probably the queen, for want of a better term, pun not intended. Yeah, and people...
There's too much about Aurora that I think is too similar to Cinderella.
Yeah.
And that just causes... Aurora to fall into the background between like the hair and the color scheme and all that stuff.
And Snow White isn't really that interesting, but she's the first, so she has that kind of status.
She does have the character design of Snow White is iconic. It's very good, even though there's literally no depth to her character whatsoever.
As we said, this film was extremely expensive to produce. Costs were going through the roof and continuing to climb, so Disney could no longer afford to produce a film like this. So this in some ways was the end of an era for that type of filmmaking for some time.
They're like, we're doing this on a budget.
As we move into the 60s, it has that very, I almost said yesterday, comic strip loose kind of...
I would have said toony style. It's like the Disney Toon style kind of comes into vogue.
Flat colours and backgrounds, you know. And again, we have some very iconic and important films coming up, but they weren't made to the level of artistic value of this. This made a case for animation as art.
Yeah.
Whereas going forward, they were making animation as...
Kids films.
A commercial endeavour.
And it's fine, because kids films can be very good, but this is like, we're going to make every frame of this pop in a way that it really doesn't have to, but we're going to do it anyway. Whereas, from here on out, it's like, all right, 2-year cycle, churn out a kids film.
Yeah, which is a shame, but they came back around again. So these things come in cycles.
So is this technically the end of the Disney Renaissance? Is it like 3 films long?
No, they've had some
I suppose 101 Dalmatians is next, which is also beloved. So.
And we have the Aristocats coming up. We also have things like the Jungle Book as well.
And Jungle Book is maybe the last of the Renaissance? I don't know.
Possibly. But time will tell, Gar. We have a lot of episodes to come to talk about all that.
Yeah, so when you look at Sleeping Beauty, it's the second best Disney film so far. Of the first 16, it's number 2, behind Bambi. It has the most iconic villain in Disney history. I'm going to commit to that. It has the most iconic villain in Disney history. Maleficent kicks ass. Probably more than who would you put up there as well, Ken?
Scar, maybe Judge Frollo as well.
Who?
From Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think that she knows it just for how she's become so present in our culture. Like the vision and the design is something that, everybody recognises. It inspired the Maleficent franchise, a twist on the telling of the original film.
Have you seen those films?
I've seen the first one and not the second one.
Is it good?
It is good. And as I said, I appreciate... It was the first of the backstory of a villain, and that's become a bit of a trope these days because, if all villains are good, where do villains come from? But all people have an element of good in them, and we find out why they go bad. That's interesting to me, or at least it was at the time when it was new.
And I do appreciate that, the more recent live-action remakes have been, literally shot-for-shot remakes, just in live-action. Whereas, that, at the very least, they're we're going to do something different. We're going to look at Maleficent from a different angle. And that's much more interesting to me than just, we're going to take The Lion King, but the lions are real. That's it. That's the only difference. There's nothing else different about the entire experience. It's kind of pointless.
Yeah, Maleficent, it is a sign that she was the star of this film because, as you said, they wanted
and Aurora is the Forgotten Princess, so that doesn't help.
Yeah, so they took the franchise in that direction rather than making a Sleeping Beauty film, which they can still make. There's still a chance to make that, although Aurora does appear in the Maleficent film. So
she also appears in Kingdom Hearts. But if you want to know how forgettable she is, the whole plot of Kingdom Hearts, the first Kingdom Hearts, is they're kidnapping the Disney princesses to power Kingdom Hearts. And I'm pretty sure Aurora is already kidnapped by the start of the first game, if you want to know how forgettable she is.
Poor Aurora. Maybe she'll have a renaissance someday. The film was submitted to the Library of Congress in 2019, like a lot of Disney films, but it does have that distinction, so it made the cut. And to help promote the film, Imagineers at Disneyland named the park's...
Imagineers. Sorry.
Thank you for interrupting me, Garrett.
You're welcome.
Named the park's icon Sleeping Beauty Castle. It was originally to be Snow White's castle.
I thought it was Cinderella's castle.
That's Disney World.
All right.
And the name remains to this day, so even though it was a promotional tool, they decided to stick with it. And if you go to Disneyland Paris, there is the inside is dedicated to Sleeping Beauty, so there's tapestries and ornate glass windows telling the story of Sleeping Beauty. So it has
there's a giant dragon in there too, isn't there?
Yeah.
I remember that. I've been there twice.
So it does have a strong place in Disney history, and it is one of the most interesting and fulfilling films that I've seen so far. So I would definitely say watch it.
Well, yeah, it's the second best. It's better than 14 other films. You should watch it.
Well, we went through a very dark era there recently, Karen, so it's not hard to be up the top of that list.
It's not hard to be better than Saludos Amigos. No, the other one, Three Caballeros. Saludos Amigos was good.
Karen, every time you say the name of that film, it hurts me. Okay, princes and princesses, that's nearly it for the show this week. Our resident Sleeping Beauty, Nicole, is coming up in just a few moments with a song from the movie. I think you might be able to guess which beloved Disney tune she's singing this week, so be sure to stick around for that after the outro, because it's bound to be magical. You can find new episodes of Magic by Design every Monday, where all magical podcasts are downloaded. Check out the website at magicbydesign.buzzsprout.com to find a full list of podcast providers. Magic by Design is also on all your favorite social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/magicbydesignpod, on Twitter at magicdesignpod, because we couldn't get the name, and on the Insta at magicbydesignpod. If you're a fan of the show, please do consider giving us a positive review on your podcast platform of choice, share the podcast on your socials, or even recommend the show to a fellow Disney lover. It doesn't take 3 fairies for this podcast to have a happy ending. All it takes is several thousand 5-star reviews.
I wish I was a fairy. I had magical powers.
I wish I had, and they have that kind of magic where you can just do anything you want.
Yeah, you can just bippity-boppity-boo anything into existence. What a life!
I think I'd go mad with...
No wonder freaking what's-her-name is just like, I want to do everything with magic! So would I!
I want a sandwich? Boom. I want a bigger TV? Boom. I think I'd go maniacal with power, though.
Yes, I'd full go Maleficent and be like, thunder from the sky! Ha ha ha!
We will be back next week at the same time, same place, with Disney's 17th animated feature, 101 Dalmatians. But until then, stay safe and remember, stay away from spinning wheels. They will inevitably hypnotize you into pricking your finger on the needle, plunging you and your entire city into an endless sleep, which can only be ended by true love's kiss. Disaster. Now then, Nicole is here to sing us out with Once Upon a Dream from Sleeping Beauty, as well as awakening us to some fun facts about the music of the film. Over to you, Aurora. Nicole.
Hello, Disney lovers. It's me again, your musical correspondent, Nicole, coming to you live from my bedroom. Let's dive into Sleeping Beauty. In the early 1950s, Jack Lawrence and Sammy Fain were assigned to write the songs for Sleeping Beauty. However, Disney decided later that the score should be based on the Tchaikovsky ballet of the same name. All of the songs previously composed by Lawrence and Fain were canned except for Once Upon a Dream. Walter Schumann agreed to complete the score for Sleeping Beauty but walked away due to creative differences, and so George Bruns replaced Schumann. This was Bruns' first of many Disney gigs. He adapted much of Tchaikovsky's score, but also created striking underscores like when Maleficent appears. In music circles, Sleeping Beauty is regarded as one of the more richer and mature scores from the Disney archives of that time. Mary Costa voiced the part of Aurora, an opera singer. This was Mary's first and only Disney role. She went on to sing in countless operas worldwide and was awarded the Disney Legends Award in 1999. During the time when the film was being made, there was a musician strike in the US, where musicians refused to complete any recording sessions as a measure to benefit more financially from royalties. Because of this, the music was recorded in Berlin in 1958. This week, I'm taking a look at the classic Once Upon a Dream, a song adapted from the Garland Waltz from Tchaikovsky's ballet. I hope you enjoy it. I know you. I've walked with you once upon a dream. I know you, that gleam in your eyes is so familiar a gleam, and I know it's true that visions are seldom all